She stepped off the train with 2 worn-out trunks and a heart carrying more hope than it probably should have. The letter had painted a dream, one so vivid, it almost felt real. A home nestled on a hill, a man with steady hands and kind eyes, a warm bed, fresh eggs every morning from 7 hens. It promised food, safety, maybe even a little love. For a woman like Clara, who had known more loneliness than comfort, it was enough to make her believe again. But when she arrived at Dry Creek Station, there was no one waiting, no man with her name on a sign, no horse hitched to a cart, just dust, wind, and a barefoot boy no older than 10, standing in the dirt like he'd been waiting his whole life. "You Clara Mayfield?" he asked. His voice didn't tremble, but hers almost did when she said yes. The boy blinked. "Pa's dead. Snake bite. Buried him ourselves." That's how the dream ended. No wedding, no warm bed, no man with kind hands. Just a boy named Sam and the impossible truth. The man she came to marry had written her that letter knowing he might never be alive to greet her. He sent for her anyway. "Maybe you'd still come," Sam had said, and here she was, with nothing left to return to, and 6 children now looking at her like she might be the last thread holding them together. "I wonder, what would you have done in her place?" It's easy to imagine walking away, to say, "This isn't what I signed up for." But Clara didn't. Maybe because something inside her recognized the look in Sam's eyes, that hollow, hungry kind of hope. The kind that's too fragile to speak aloud. When he told her there were 7 kids, but now only 6 since Jenny died last winter. When he said the baby was still nursing, and they had no one else. Clara didn't climb back onto that train. She looked down at her boots, at her heavy trunks, then at the boy standing like stone. "Where's the house?" she asked. And just like that, she chose to follow him. Now that may not sound heroic. There's no dramatic music in the background. No applause, just quiet steps through the dust toward a shack barely holding itself together. But sometimes the greatest acts of courage don't come with fanfare. They happen in silence. In the decision to stay when you have every reason to run. Clara didn't come for love. But maybe, just maybe, she came for something bigger. We don't talk enough about people like Clara. People who show up. Who say yes to broken places and broken people. Who arrive with empty hands and still choose to build. That's what makes this story worth telling. Not because it's grand or glamorous, but because it's real. Because somewhere out there, there's another Clara standing at the edge of a decision that feels impossible. And maybe, just maybe, she needs to hear this. You don't have to be chosen to matter. You can choose. And sometimes that choice is the beginning of everything. The house was smaller than she expected. Just 1 room wide, its porch slanted like a tired shoulder. The door creaked on its hinge, and the chimney looked like it might collapse under the weight of everything that had already gone wrong. But Clara stepped inside anyway, carrying nothing but a satchel, a sliver of resolve, and a piece of salted pork she'd hidden in her bag back in Kansas. What she found inside wasn't furniture or comfort. It was 6 pairs of eyes. Quiet. Thin. Watching no one said welcome. But sometimes the absence of rejection is its own kind of invitation. There were no second chances in this place. No illusions. Just a table set for supper, though no meal waited. Just a baby asleep by the fire and children sitting like they'd done this routine 1,000 times. Waited for a ghost of dinner to appear. One of them, a girl named Ruth, stood up holding a wooden spoon like a weapon and said, "I stir things. Mama used to," before she bled out. Clara didn't flinch. She just walked to the pot over the fire and opened it. Thin broth, a couple beans, 1 potato cut into 7, and somehow, even in the poverty of it all, there was a kind of sacredness. Like hunger had trained them to wait together. That's when Clara took out her piece of salted pork. She dropped it into the stew, crushed herbs from her travel bag, and added water from her canteen. The smell changed everything. The silence turned to attention. The baby stirred, and for a moment it felt like a beginning, not of comfort but of connection. "Eat slow," she said. "Let your stomach remember it." They did. She didn't sit down. She didn't eat. Her hands passed out bowls while her eyes memorized their faces. That meal wasn't for her. It was her offering. A quiet way of saying, if I'm here for real. After dinner, as the children washed up in a bucket outside, Clara stayed inside, taking in the creaks of the house, the smell of ash and old cloth. She found the chair where the man, Sam's father, used to sit. It stayed empty, out of respect, out of grief. Maybe both. And that's when she found it, tucked beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, hidden in a sack of oats that had long turned to dust. A thin ledger, just 20 pages, bound with a strip of fabric that looked like it had once belonged to a wedding dress. She opened it like it was breathing, fragile and final all at once. Inside were birth dates, harvest records, a chicken, co-op plan that had never been built, and then the back page. In a shaky, uneven scrawl, Clara Mayfield arrives June 3rd. She's to be treated kindly. She has nothing, but we'll give her everything we've got. It was written by a man who knew he was dying. Think about that. A man facing the end of his life didn't use his last words to talk about regret or pain. He used them to write her into the future, and that's what broke her. Because sometimes what we're given isn't what we hoped for. Sometimes the promises fall apart before we arrive. But if someone believed in you, even once, before they ever met you, isn't that something worth staying for? This wasn't the life she was promised. But maybe it was the one she was meant to choose. And sometimes, a house with no guarantees is exactly where you begin building something real. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Clara stepped outside and sat on the porch. The stars above her blinked cold and quiet, the kind of night sky that doesn't offer answers, just more questions. And in that silence, Sam came, out too. The boy who had buried his father just days ago, the boy who now stood between childhood and something far older than his age could carry. He didn't say much, just sat beside her, his feet dangling off the porch edge like he still wasn't sure if he belonged in this story or just happened to survive it. She turned to him gently and said, "That ledger, it belonged to your father. I read what he wrote." Sam didn't meet her eyes. He just nodded. He knew he wasn't going to make it, told me to dig the grave deep and wait at the station, just in case. Clara paused. "Why didn't you tell me that he wrote those words, that he asked me to come even knowing?" Sam shrugged. "Didn't want to scare you off. Didn't want you to feel trapped either." That line hit something deep, because Clara knew what it meant to feel both afraid and stuck. And yet there she was, still sitting, still there, not because of a promise made by a dying man, but because of something else entirely. "I'm not scared," she said quietly, "and I'm not trapped. But I do need to know, what happened to your mother?" Sam's voice came out low, weighted. "She bled out after Jonah was born. Like Ruth said, no one could stop it. Preacher said it was God's will. I think it was the dust, and the fact that no one came. That moment right there, it wasn't just the passing of a story. It was the handing over of pain, the kind that had sat too long in silence." Clara didn't rush to respond. She let the egg breathe between them. Then finally she said the only thing she could say with truth. "I'm not your mother," she whispered, "but I'm not leaving either." Now pause here and really think about that, because it's easy to stay when everything makes sense, when there's love or blood or law binding you to a place. But what if there's none of that? What if the only reason you stay is because someone needs you to? That's what Clara chose. Not duty, not romance, but presence. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes the people we end up needing most are the ones who didn't come for us in the first place. They came for something else, maybe even for themselves, but found purpose in staying. And that kind of choice, that kind of love, it doesn't need a title. It doesn't need a ring. It just needs someone to say, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." In the end, That's what changed everything. Not a wedding, not a law, but a woman who had every right to leave, and chose to build instead. And maybe the world would be a little softer if more of us believed that staying, just because someone matters, is reason enough. It started with smoke. Not from their chimney, Clara had made sure of that. This smoke came from the ridge to the east where no neighbors lived, no kin had claim. It was darker than cooking smoke, thinner than campfire. It was the kind of smoke that whispered, "Someone's watching." And Clara saw it just after dawn, curled against the pink sky like a warning written in the wind. She didn't tell the children. Not at first. They were laughing, chasing each other through the frosted grass, their cheeks red from the cold, and maybe from something new, the comfort of routine. She didn't have the heart to stain that moment with fear. But Sam noticed. He always noticed. When he came in from the woods with an armload of firewood, his voice was calm but sharp. "That's not chimney smoke," he said. "It's too dark." Clara nodded. "How often do riders come this way?" "Hardly ever," he answered. That was all they needed to know. That night, Clara kept the stew boiling longer than usual. The air inside the cabin grew tight, thick with unspoken worry. She checked the latch twice, then wrapped the baby tighter and told Ruth, "Keep her close." The younger boys went quiet, sensing something had shifted, something adults never say out loud but children always feel. Later, Clara stepped onto the porch, shawl wrapped tight, eyes scanning the tree line. Sam joined her without being asked. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" He whispered. "That someone's come for something," she said. "Maybe for me. Maybe for the land. Maybe your father owed more than just time." Sam didn't speak right away. Then, with a weight far too heavy for a boy his age, he said, "You'd leave if it meant keeping us safe?" Clara didn't answer right away. "I'd fight first," she said finally. He studied her for a long moment. "You don't look like a fighter." "That's what makes it work," she replied. And that's when they saw him, just past the line of trees, a tall man on horseback. He didn't move closer, didn't wave, just watched, and then vanished again behind the smoke. That night, Clara didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote. Not to anyone back east, there was no one left to write to. She wrote a letter to no one. Or maybe to everything, the trees, the wind, the truth. "If I fall," she wrote, "let them say I came empty-handed and still made a home. At dawn, the smoke was gone. But so were 2 hens. The woodpile was trampled, the barn latch broken. No direct harm. But the message was clear. That afternoon, someone returned, not from the ridge, but from the past. A man dismounted from a chestnut horse. No swagger, no threat, just quiet purpose. His name was Warren, and he was the brother of Richard, the man Clara had come to marry and never met. He didn't speak much, just handed her a satchel. Inside was a ledger, just like the one under the hearth. Same fabric binding, same careful, uneven writing. But this one was full, every page inked with months of letters Richard had written to his brother. Letters Warren never answered, until the last one came, and it held Clara's name. He said he wasn't sending for a wife, Warren told her. He was sending for a heart, for the kids. Said if he didn't make it, maybe you'd stay, and if you did, everything should be yours. Clara stood frozen, the weight of it all crashing down in silent waves. Then Warren reached into the bag again and handed her a small key. "To the safe under the floorboards," he said. "It's not gold, just what he saved." That night, Clara opened it. Not with expectation, but with reverence. Inside wasn't money. It was a deed unsigned. A letter, not to her, but to the woman who says yes, even after she knows. And a pouch with 7 mismatched buttons, bone, wood, metal, taken from baby clothes no one remembers, but no parent ever forgets. In that moment, Clara understood. This wasn't just survival. It was a legacy passed down through quiet faith. Through smoke, fear, and grief, someone had believed she would come, and she had, not for love, but for something greater. And now, she chose to stay. Not because a man asked her to, but because a house full of unfinished lives needed someone to say, "I'm not leaving." Winter came fast that year, the kind of winter that doesn't knock before entering. It just settles in your bones, silent and sure. Clara had already started preparing, stockpiling dry herbs, mending old quilts, boiling stew longer than needed. But nothing prepared her for what arrived with the first real frost: fever. It started with Jonah, the smallest boy after the baby. One morning, he clung to Clara's skirt, his cheeks burning, eyes glassy, barely able to lift a spoon. By noon, Ruth was pale and quiet, her voice a whisper. Within 2 days, 4 of the 7 children were sick. Their tiny bodies burned under threadbare blankets while Clara rotated cold cloths, whispered comfort she barely believed herself, and boiled pine needle tea like it might ward off death. There's a different kind of terror that comes when a child is sick, not just because of the illness, but because of the helplessness. And when the baby stopped crying, no whimper, no sound at all, that helplessness became horror. Clara held him against her chest all night, counting each shallow breath like a prayer. She didn't sleep. Her hands blistered from stoking the fire. Her voice cracked from lullabies she didn't remember learning. She hummed to keep from falling apart. And then, just before dawn on the 3rd day, Warren returned. He hadn't planned to stay, just meant to drop off firewood and salted meat. But the moment he saw the state of the house, children burning with fever, Clara kneeling at the hearth, he dismounted and went straight to work. No questions, no ceremony. He built a steam tent out of blankets and boiling water. Clara spooned broth into trembling mouths. They moved as if they'd done this forever. 2 strangers bound not by romance but by resolve. Sam, still healthy, still holding on, helped however he could. Until the moment Ruth collapsed at the wash basin and didn't open her eyes for hours. "Is she gone?" he asked, voice barely above a breath. "Not yet," Clara whispered, pressing her forehead to Ruth's burning skin. "And not today." That night, when the fever reached its peak, Clara finally did what she hadn't done in years. She knelt by the fire and begged, not to any name, just to the dark. "Don't take them," she whispered. "Take anything else, but not them." And the fire, which had nearly gone out, surged. Just a little. Just enough. The next morning, Jonah asked for bread. The baby whimpered. Ruth blinked slowly, then smiled for the first time in days. The fever had broken. Later that day, Sam sat by the hearth, his face still pale, but his eyes clear. He looked at Clara, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as something much more. "You stayed," he said softly. Clara didn't hesitate. "There was never a day I wouldn't. That's the thing, isn't it? Family isn't always something we're born into. Sometimes it's something we choose, or something that chooses us." Clara hadn't come to be a mother, but she became one, not by law, not by blood, but by love given in the middle of a storm. And in that house, cracked with grief, but warmed by firelight, a new kind of family was born. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Sometimes the first battle isn't about defeating an enemy. It's about showing up, staying, loving through the fever, and proving without saying it that this is home. Sometimes trouble doesn't come with fire or storms. Sometimes it comes dressed in clean coats, polished boots, and a folded piece of paper stamped by a judge. That was the kind of trouble that showed up at Clara's door. It had been weeks since the fever passed. The children were stronger, the air warmer. Clara had started stitching flour sack quilts, and the house no longer echoed with silence. It echoed with life. But one morning, two men arrived uninvited. One tall, one squat. Both looked like they hadn't smiled in years. They didn't come to offer help. They came with words like custody and debt and unclaimed minors. The taller one glanced at Clara with that smirk people wear when they think they already know how the story ends. "We heard the bride showed up," he said, eyes sweeping the porch. "But no wedding means no rights. These kids, they're wards of the county now." It was meant to scare her, and maybe a part of her was scared, but only for a second. Clara stood tall. "I have a letter, a deed, witnesses." The shorter man laughed. "That might work in town, but out here, this land's in debt. Your husband never paid it off, and now that he's gone, you're just someone living on what's not yours. It's funny how people will use law like a weapon when their hearts are empty." Behind her, the door creaked open. Sam stepped out first, holding the old rifle above the mantel. It wasn't even loaded, but you'd never know it from the way he looked at those men. Steady, unblinking. Ruth followed, barefoot, arms crossed, standing next to Clara like a soldier without armor. "We're not going anywhere," Sam said. "That's not your decision, boy," one of the men snapped. Ruth didn't flinch. "Then whose is it? Pa's dead, Ma's buried, and this woman stayed when she could have run." And that's when Clara did something she hadn't needed to do in a long time. She placed her hands on both their shoulders, looked those men dead in the eye, and said, "You'll do no taking today. This house might not have a title carved in stone, but it was built by hands that bled for it. And these children? They're not lost, they've been found. By me. And they're not going anywhere but with each other." One of the men took a step forward. And then, from the edge of the barn, Warren appeared, shotgun resting casually on his shoulder. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The stillness behind him roared louder than any threat. The two men backed down, muttering about paperwork, sheriffs, and how this wasn't over. But they left, and that's when it hit Clara. She hadn't just protected them. She'd been claimed. Not by law, not by blood, but by the only thing that ever truly makes a family: choice. These children had chosen her, and sometimes that means more than any judge's seal or piece of paper. Because family isn't always what we're born into. It's who shows up, who fights for you, who stays. And in that moment, Clara knew she wasn't standing for them. She was standing with them, and they, in turn, stood with her. That's how homes are built, not from wood, but from will. Winter arrived early that year, not just in temperature, but in the kind of quiet that settles deep in the bones. The house was still standing, stronger than before, not because the roof no longer leaked, but because laughter now echoed through its walls. The children had stopped whispering at bedtime. They had learned to breathe without fear, to trust that morning would bring warmth, not emptiness. Then one morning, just as Clara was peeling potatoes for stew, Sam spotted her, barefoot, at the gate, a girl no older than 16. Her arms clutched a baby wrapped in an old coat, her lips cracked from wind, her eyes hollowed by something deeper than cold. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just stood there, like a question no one had the courage to ask. Clara stepped outside, no hesitation in her voice, no demand for explanation. She simply opened the door wide and said, "You're not late, you're right on time." And the girl collapsed into her arms. Her name was Liza. Her baby had a weak cry but was still breathing. That was enough. Ruth took the child without question. Sam put on tea. No one asked where she'd come from or who had hurt her. They didn't need to, because everyone in that house recognized the look. They'd worn it once too. The look of someone not yet sure whether they were allowed to fall apart. That night, Clara sat beside her near the hearth, both of them wrapped in old quilts that had known too many stories. The room was warm with firelight, the kind of warmth that isn't just heat, it's welcome. Clara leaned in gently, her voice calm and rooted in something earned. "You're not here to be saved," she said. "You're here to remember what it feels like to matter." Liza cried for a long time, the kind of cry that carries years, and in the morning, she helped make breakfast. Then she stayed. What Clara had built wasn't just a shelter. It had become a beacon. Not loud, not bright, but steady. The kind of place that didn't advertise itself, but found those who needed it. And every so often someone would arrive at the gate, a widow with too much silence in her home, a man bringing firewood and apologies, or a boy looking for something he never had a name for. The door was never locked. It didn't need to be. You. See, Clara wasn't chosen by blood or bound by ceremony. She was chosen through need, through love, through staying. She had become something sacred, not because she was perfect, but because she had remained when it would have been easier to leave. And maybe that's the kind of legacy we don't talk enough about. Not the loud kind, not the praised kind, but the kind that turns broken houses into safe ones. The kind that whispers, "You belong here," and means it. By spring, they had more mouths to feed, more stories to carry, more blankets to patch. But not once did Clara say they didn't have room. Because when you build a home from the heart outward, the walls always find a way to stretch. And somewhere between the second helping of soup and the sound of a baby's quiet breath, Liza smiled. Not because her past had vanished, but because, for the first time, her future had a door that stayed open. And maybe that's all a lost soul really needs. Not to be rescued, but to be seen, to be remembered, to be welcomed like the answer to a prayer no one dared speak out loud. In the end, it wasn't the wedding dress she never wore, or the name she never officially took that defined her. It was the porch swing the children helped her hang. The chicken coop Sam finally finished, right where his father once sketched the plans. The extra room added on with help from neighbors, one board, one nail, one kindness at a time. Clara Mayfield arrived with nothing but a letter, a satchel, and a quiet kind of strength. She had no ring on her finger, no husband waiting at the gate. But she stayed. Through fever and fire, through strangers and storms, she stayed. And in doing so, she became something more than a bride. She became a mother. Not just to the 7 children she first fed and sheltered, but to every lost soul who found their way to her door. By the time spring arrived, the house had changed. It breathed differently now. Where there had once been silence, there was laughter, real belly-deep laughter, echoing through cracked windows and freshly mended curtains. The children no longer flinched when the wind rose. They no longer waited to be left behind. Even the land felt changed, still rough, still stubborn, but alive. Sam had started planting tomatoes. Ruth taught Liza how to sew baby boots and hush crying in the night. The younger ones ran barefoot across the yard, leaving muddy footprints on the porch Clara swept with quiet joy. She never remarried. Never left the ridge. Never put away the old letter Richard had written, or the pouch of 7 mismatched buttons she kept in a glass jar by the window. But she did write something of her own. A final note, folded and tucked inside the back of the ledger. It wasn't addressed to anyone, and yet, it was meant for everyone. It read, "If you find this house, know that no one here was born lucky. But each of us chose to stay, chose to love, chose to build even when we had nothing. So if you're lost, or hungry, or unsure whether the world still holds people who won't let go, come in. There's soup on the fire, and a bed in the corner. We've been waiting for you, and maybe that's the truest kind of legacy. Not a fortune, not a surname carved in stone, but a life lived with open hands and open doors. A life where family is not measured by bloodlines or signatures, but by the moments we say yes, to each other, to the hard days, to the broken beginnings." In the eyes of the law, Clara Mayfield Walker may never have been a wife. But in the eyes of everyone who passed through that crooked door, she was more than that. She was the heartbeat of a home, the keeper of the fire, and when the world tried to forget them, she wrote their names down, one by one, so they'd always have a place to belong.